Okay, back in Record People versus Willis. Nice to see you're all here. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for returning. And we're ready to proceed. You want to call your final witness, Mr. Headphone.
Thank you, Judge. The people of the state of Michigan call Ms. Michelle Schmidt to the stand. And as she's coming out, we're going to be looking at the screen again, so I'm sorry, folks.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please have a seat. State your name for the record.
My name is Michelle Schmidt, M-I-C-H-E-L-L-E, Schmidt, S-C-H-M-I-T-T.
Good morning, Schmidt.
Good morning.
Who do you work for?
I am currently employed by the Michigan State Police in the DNA unit at the Grand Rapids Laboratory.
And how long have you held that current assignment?
I've been with the Michigan State Police for a little over 4 years, and prior to that, I was a DNA analyst and supervisor in the New York City office of the Chief Medical Examiner, and I was there for 7 years.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about your education that allows you to do the things that you've done in your life thus far. How are you educated?
I have a bachelor's degree in biology from Grand Valley State University, and I have a master's degree in forensic molecular biology from the George Washington University in Washington, D.C.
And I want to split your training. All right, we're going to talk about your specialized training in a second. But other than what you're now specialized in, what does your training consist of to do the work that you do?
For each technique that I perform on cases at the Michigan State Police, I watched a trained analyst perform that technique. I then practice that technique on samples. I then perform a competency test where I'm given samples where I don't know the answer, and they're reviewed by my supervisor for their accuracy on that test. And then I'm required to take a written test to show my understanding of the scientific principles.
Now, let's talk about your specialized training. We've had some testimony from some of your colleagues about a new way that you are analyzing, in particular, mixture DNA samples called the STR mix system. How are you specially trained in that system?
We've been using StarMix on samples since 2016. And to become competent in StarMix, I attended a week-long lecture taught by the developers of the StarMix software program. I then came back to the laboratory, practiced using StarMix on samples, submitted samples for our validation, and I took a written test which I passed to show my underlying understanding of the science behind the StarMix software. And I then performed StarMix on competency samples that were prepared by my technical leader and reviewed for him for accuracy.
And as far as that goes, were you able to pass those competency exams?
Yes, I was.
Now, have you had an opportunity to testify in court before, both as an expert in the field that you work in, but also as an expert as it relates to StarMix?
Yes, I've been qualified as an expert in DNA analysis over 70 times in the state of Michigan, the state of New York, and the state of New Jersey. I've had the opportunity to testify on cases using StarMix in the state of Michigan, and I've also testified to the basis of that, which is the statistical calculation of a likelihood ratio in the state of New York.
Okay. So, and I'm assuming that in every time that you've testified in court, both as a forensic biologist and in your expertise for StarMix, you've been qualified an expert each time by the court?
Yes, I have.
Your Honor, I would move for the admission of Michelle Schmidt being an expert in the area of forensic biology that would include serology, DNA analysis, and the statistical significance of DNA profiling, including the use and understanding of StarMix.
Thank you. Well, dear John.
Right ahead.
Good morning, Ms. Schmidt.
Good morning.
I'm Fred Johnson. I don't know if we've met or not. I think we may have, but Garris. Good morning.
Good morning.
Ma'am, how many times have you been called to testify in the courtroom as an expert?
Gosh, I don't know how many times I've been called to testify. I get many subpoenas that never go to trial, but I've been qualified as a DNA expert over 70 times in the state of Michigan, the state of New York, and the state of New Jersey.
And when you've been called in the state of Michigan, who has called you? Has it been defense counsel or prosecutors or both?
Typically that I've been called in the state of Michigan has been prosecutors. However, in the state of New York, I was called approximately 15 to 20% of the time by defense attorneys.
What's your approximate percent of time called by defense counsel in Michigan?
That would be none.
Okay. Thank you. I have no further questions, Your Honor. Now I have an objection to Commissioner's qualifications.
All right, you may be allowed to testify with the field expertise set forth in the proffer.
All right, I'm not going to ask you about DNA. We've had a lot of conversation about that, but I want you to talk about what StarMix is.
So StarMix is a statistical software program that assists DNA analysts in interpreting DNA profiles and calculating statistical analysis. The software program looks at all possible combinations of alleles or possible contributors and compares that to the DNA that's detected in a sample to see which combination best describes the evidence that we were able to detect. Using advanced biological modeling and statistical equations and algorithms, each combination of alleles is assigned a weight, and those weights, when given a reference sample, can then be calculated into a likelihood ratio.
And when we talk about reference samples, you're talking about the known samples, right? When you're given a known sample, you input that and it becomes part of that mathematical calculation.
That is correct. When I speak of a reference sample, I'm speaking of a known sample taken directly from an individual.
And is this program typically used for mixture samples? In other words, when we've had some conversation or some testimony about single source findings in this particular investigation. This particular program, is it totally geared towards mixtures, or do you use it in single sources as well?
Typically, we use this StarMix software on mixtures. However, single-source DNA samples can be analyzed through the system as well. And I've written reports and testified many times on using the StarMix software on both mixtures and on single-source samples. And a mixture is just a DNA profile that is from more than one individual, and a single-source DNA profile arises from just one individual.
So the jury had a lot of testimony about the calculations used in single source, the single source analysis. Can you explain to them?
DNA record, record number 2, in which I performed serology testing on items that were submitted in relation to the offense against Miss Rebecca Bletch.
All right. So obviously, there's no DNA work being done here. This is you just taking swabs of certain pieces of evidence and passing it along.
This was basically swabs were taken of these items, and for the most part in this case, I just cut a portion of the swab, placed it in a tube for further DNA analysis. In this record, though, I did create a DNA blood card for Rebecca Bletch, and that's just so we can maintain the blood if we need to take another cutting or use it in the future.
All right. So you helped establish and I think that's the last item on that report, the blood stain card you created out of Ms. Bletch?
Yes, I did.
Okay. In that report, is there anything different in that report that is different than the original, or I'm sorry, is there anything in that exhibit that is different than the original report that you sent to us?
There is not.
Your Honor, I move for the admission of 246. People's Exhibit 247. What are we looking at? What did you do in this report?
People's Exhibit 247 is again a serology DNA report that I authored, and this was where I simply took samples or cut a DNA swab again, to place into a tube for further DNA analysis.
So no DNA testing in this particular report?
That is correct.
All right. Anything different in the marked exhibit than from the original that you sent to investigators?
There is not.
Your Honor, I move for the admission of People's Exhibit 247.
Received.
People's Exhibit 248. What did you do in this report?
Again, in this report, I just cut a portion of a swab from a known individual, place it in a tube for further DNA analysis.
Get no DNA no DNA analysis in this particular report.
That is correct.
And I'll ask you the same question. Is there anything different in the marked exhibit than from your original report you submitted to investigators?
No, there is not.
Your Honor, I move for the admission of People's Exhibit 248.
Received.
All right. People's Exhibit 249. What did you do in this report?
In this report, I again cut a portion of a known sample taken from an individual, place it into a tube for further DNA analysis.
We had no DNA analysis done in this particular exam. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And sorry, I'll ask you the same question I've asked so far. Is there anything different in that marked exhibit, that report, than the original that you sent to investigators?
No, there is not.
Your Honor, I move for the admission of People's 249. I'm going to hand you what's been marked as People's Exhibit 250. Second here. Okay. What duties did you perform in this particular report?
In this report, I perform serology testing, which is typically where I'm looking for blood, semen or saliva, or possibly skin cells. And that was done on container number 34, which was a sexual assault kit taken from Rebecca Bletch.
And in your work, we had, again, Mr. Hayhurst kind of went through the different testing, so I'm not going to go that through, but I will ask the question. In the testing of the various swabs and slides, did you find anything of evidentiary value?
I looked at the vaginal swabs taken from Rebecca Bletch. That did not indicate the presence of seminal fluid, and sperm cells were not observed in that sample. I looked at the oral swabs taken from, and the oral slides taken from Rebecca Bletch. That did not indicate the presence of seminal fluid, and sperm cells were not observed on those samples. I then looked at the anal swabs and smears that, again, did not indicate that seminal fluid was present, nor were sperm cells observed. There was a sample taken from the right shoulder swabs. This did not indicate the presence of possible blood. However, I did cut that sample, place it into a tube, and further DNA testing was done on that item.
So, essentially, you were unable to find, via the chemical testing, the presence of seminal fluid or semen in any of the rape kit items. Is that an accurate statement?
That is correct. I also looked at slides under a microscope and did not visually see sperm cells either.
And certainly, I'll ask you this, Mr. Schmidt, in order to find seminal fluid or the semen itself, one would have to ejaculate. Fair enough?
Seminal fluid and sperm cells do come from ejaculate, so correct.
And if an individual was touched by an object, you wouldn't find the presence of any seminal fluid or sperm cells, correct?
That is correct. If there was an object, I would not be able to detect seminal fluid or sperm cells. However, there also could have been no contact as well.
So my last question to you certainly is this report, which is People's Exhibit 250, is there anything different in the marked exhibit than the original report you provided to the investigator?
There is not.
Your Honor, I move for the admission of People's 250.
No objection.
Steve?
Any what's been marked as People's Exhibit 251. Give me 1 second. That's your record 18. What did you do in this report?
In this report, I took a swab of a pair of white headphones, allowed that swab to dry properly, cut it, and placed it in a tube for further DNA analysis.
So this is another serology report?
That is correct. No DNA testing was done in this report.
Okay. And again, anything in that report, the marked exhibit, I should say, that's different than the original report that you provided to investigators?
No, there is not.
Your Honor, I move for the admission of People's Exhibit 251.
No objection, Your Honor.
Received.
Any who has been marked as People's Exhibit 252. Give me 1 second here. What did you do in this report?
This was my first opportunity to perform DNA testing on this case, and I performed the DNA testing on the swab that I took from those headphones.
And what were you able to determine based, or I guess let's ask this question, what system did you use and then what were you able to determine?
I tested the headphones using the fusion amplification kit, which is a chemistry that's used in many forensic laboratories across the country.
And what were you able to determine based off of the examination?
There was a partial mixture of two individuals, including one unknown contributor, and he then was able to then compare that major donor, which is the person who donated the most DNA to that sample, to many of the knowns that had previously been processed. The following individuals were excluded as a contributor to the major donor to the headphone swab, and that was Rebecca Bletch, Robert Metcalf, Kevin Bletch, Robert Kinnar, Roger Johnson, Brian Harris, Donald Papera, and Donald Papera. The minor donor to that mixture from two individuals was insufficient for any association purposes, and no conclusions could be drawn.
Okay. Is there anything different in that marked exhibit than your original report that you provided to investigators?
No, there is not.
Your Honor, I move for the admission of People's Exhibit 252.
No objection, Your Honor.
Handing you what's been marked as People's Exhibit 253. What did you do in that report?
In this report, I again cut known samples from individuals, placed a portion of the swab taken from them into a tube, and prepared it for DNA analysis.
And these known individuals, they're all first responders, is that correct?
That is correct.
And again, the marked exhibit, is there anything different in that report than the one that you authored and provided to investigators?
No, there is not.
Your Honor, I move for the admission of People's Exhibit 253.
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, handing you what's been marked as People's Exhibit 254. What did you do in this report?
In this report, I processed the DNA samples from the known individuals from the first responders, and then compared that known DNA from each of those individuals to previous samples that had been analyzed by my colleagues.
And what were you able to determine?
I was able to determine that the DNA profile from Stasia Ripley, Alan Stiles, and Lisa Fairs they were excluded as possible donors to the following items. They were excluded as a donor from the swab of the sunglasses. They were excluded as possible donors to the left wrist swabs. They were excluded as possible donors to the swab from the right fingernail clippings and clippers. They were excluded as possible donors from the left fingernail clippings and clippers. They were excluded as a possible donors from the right wrist swabs. They were excluded as possible donors to the right shoulder swabs. And they were excluded as possible donors to the headphone swab. The one sample I was not able to compare was the swab from the phone holder due to updated laboratory procedures.
And again, I'll ask you the question, in that marked exhibit, that report that's now a marked exhibit, is there anything different in that report than the original you prepared and provided to investigators?
No, there is not.
All right. I would move for the admission of People's Exhibit 260.
What do you Good morning again.
Good morning.
I'm curious, ma'am. I have a recommendation. Let me show Mr. Gibson what I'm talking about. Okay, maybe. Ms. Schmidt, during the process of this trial, we get all this information from the prosecutor, and my records are showing something slightly different than what you've described here. Can I show you a couple documents, and they both purport to be record number 21, which is being moved. And my question is, can you explain to me why those two documents have different dates on them?
The document that I was just reading from, People's Exhibit 244, is dated as a date completion of May 11th, 2016. Actually, sir, you only handed me the second page.
Okay.
I would need the first page of this other document.
All right. All right. All we have is the record number 21 on there in July 19th, 2016. Does that mean anything to you?
Sir, I would need my complete report to make any conclusions about that. I can see that the report I just was reading from, I did need to issue a corrected copy, and the corrected copy is the one that that would have been written after this report. However, I'm only handed the second page of this report. I don't have the complete record with me.
And the report that you handed, that has a completion date of March 25?
The corrected report for Record 21, which is People's Exhibit 254, that has a date completed of May 11th, 2016, and the report issue date was August 19th of 2016.
So the one I have from March, the complete report, what you're saying, the one being moved for admission is a corrected report of the March 21 report, that's also numbers 21?
People's Exhibit 254 was a corrected report.
What report does it correct? I guess that's what I'm asking.
It corrects record number 21. There was a mistake written, which I then sent an amended report to correct the mistake that had been issued.
Do you recall what the mistake was?
On this report, as on the black and white copy that I have, I can see that there's a highlighted yellow mark up here that shows it was a corrected report. And turning to page 2 of that corrected report, I see I updated the conclusion for item 2X, the swab from the phone holder, and that was not compared due to updated laboratory policy. And that is also highlighted here and highlighted on my report in a black and white copy.
Do you have any idea how many times you corrected this report? Because the March 21 report, the 25 report also says corrected copy.
This is the same report that we're speaking of. Item People's Exhibit 254 is the corrected report.
Okay.
every report that gets issued would be sent to the prosecutor, which is then given to the defense counsel. So if he has 2 copies of record number 21, it was corrected one time. There was the first report that was issued that had a mistake, and then the second report that was corrected that has the corrected information and is noted at the top of the report as the corrected copy.
And the corrected copy, what's the date of that one again?
The corrected copy has a date of May 11th, 2016, with a report issue date, which is on the bottom of all of our reports, of August 19th, 2016.
I think that's probably what's confusing me. This report also indicates it's a corrected copy, but it has a March completion date. Can you explain why the 2 dates are different for one corrected copy?
They're not different. There's multiple dates on each of our report. He's looking at the date received, which is March 25th, 2016. I'm looking underneath that date. If you look at the very top portion of the report, there's a date received, which is March 25th, 2016. Underneath that is a completion date, which is May 11th, 2016. And at the very bottom, after it's gone through all of our technical and administrative reviews, we have an issue date in which my electronic signature is placed on the report and sent out to the agencies. And that report issue date is at the very bottom of each page under that paragraph that looks like it may be italicized. And that report issue date is August 19th, 2016. It's right above the page number.
Thank you. Thank you. I have no further questions. I do not oppose the additional.
Okay, 253 will be received.
I think that's 254, Judge.
I'm sorry, 54.
Okay. Okay, handing you what's been marked as People's Exhibit 255. Can you describe what that report is, please?
This report is another serology report where no DNA analysis was done. And in this report, no serology was done either. There was a container that was submitted, container number 42, that contained contained evidence item 45037 containing the hair tie and pulled head hair, and nothing was done with this. This sample was not analyzed and returned to the agency.
Anything in that report that's the marked, exhibit report that's different than the one you supplied to investigators, the original?
No, there is not.
Your Honor, I move for the admission of People's 255.
No objection.
Please.
All right, handing you what's been marked as People's Exhibit 256. Can you tell us what that is, or what you did in this report?
On this report, I processed the DNA sample from Rebecca Bletch in the other amplification system, the fusion amplification system, and I also processed a DNA sample for DNA comparisons of Ellie Bletch, who is the daughter of Rebecca Bletch.
And what were you able to determine?
When I compared the DNA profile of Ellie Bletch to the partial DNA mixture obtained from the headphone swabs, it was determined that the DNA profile of Ellie Bletch matched the major donor to the DNA obtained from the headphone swabs. And I performed a statistical calculation on that as well.
All right, and what was that?
This statistical calculation shows how rare the DNA profile would be given the general population. It's done looking at 3 different population databases. The first population database is the Caucasian database, and using the available data, the probability of selecting an unrelated individual at random from this population having a DNA profile matching that of the major donor to the headphone swab would be 1 in 2.619 million. In the African American population database, selecting an unrelated individual at random having the same DNA profile matching that major donor of the headphone swab would be 1 in 7.508 million. And the same statement using the Hispanic database would be 1 in 7.199 million. I then compared the DNA profile of Ellie Bletch to other items that had been previously processed by my colleagues, and the DNA profile of Ellie Bletch was excluded as a possible DNA donor to the following items: to the swab of the sunglasses, the left wrist swabs, the swab from the right fingernail clippings and clippers, the swab from the left fingernail clippings and clippers, the right wrist swabs, the right shoulder swabs, and again, the sample from the phone holder, the swab taken from the phone holder, was not compared due to updated laboratory procedures.
Okay, anything in that exhibit, the marked exhibit of your report, that's different than the original you sent to investigators?
There is not.
Your Honor, I move for the admission of People's Exhibit 256.
Received.
All right, handing you what's been marked as People's Exhibit 257. One second here. What did you do in this particular report?
In this report, I examined 2 possible hairs or fibers, and both of my findings were that the possible hairs were not human in origin.
All right, so there was no need for any further analysis.
Correct. No further analysis was done on possible hairs that were not human in origin.
All right, anything different in the marked exhibit report than your original submitted to investigators?
No, there is not.
Your Honor, I move for the admission of People's 257.
No objection, Your Honor.
Okay, and with that, we're going to have to take a break. Remember, I told you there were some other cases that I have to address, and we're going to do that now. So take a break. You may stand down. Okay. And we're ready to proceed. You want to call your final witness, Mr. May.
Thank you, Judge. The people of the state of Michigan call Ms. Michelle Schmidt to the stand. And as she's coming, we're going to be looking at the screen again, so I'm sorry, folks.
Swab of van cargo area floor.
And again, MJN was put into that comparison, and what were you able to determine?
She was compared, and MJN, the DNA profile from MJN, is excluded as a possible contributor to the DNA obtained from the swab of the van cargo floor area.
Now, in the remarks section, you are asking investigators to do something. Is that correct?
Yes, I did.
Okay. What were you looking for?
In the remarks section, this will be the first sentence right underneath the bolded header remarks. I said, if comparisons of items, so the DNA profile from Rebecca Bletch and the DNA profile from the alternate reference sample for Jessica Herringer are needed, please resubmit these items.
All right. And before I ask about the report, those actually were resubmitted. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. That exhibit 259, that report, is there anything different about the marked exhibit than the original you submitted to investigators?
There is not.
Your Honor, I move for the admission of People's 259.
No objection.
Okay. I'm handing you what's been marked as People's Exhibit 260. You're going to probably need to close again.
Okay. For this particular examination, did you add additional known samples? Or reference samples, known reference samples?
Yes, additional known reference samples were brought into this record for additional comparisons to evidence previously processed by my colleagues.
And this obviously indicates that, but who was added to the list for you to look at?
We added the comparison of Rebecca Bletch, Kevin Bloom, Charlene Ann Willis, and Michelle Schnotala,
As well as Jessica Herringa?
and Jessica Herringa, yes, excuse me, yes, and her.
Now, you also looked at another item. You talked about the swab of this particular dildo vibrator, but you also, did you also look at the swab of the Reebok gloves?
Yes, I looked at the electronic data and made comparisons looking at the data from the swab taken from the Reebok glove exterior.
Okay. And that's item L6. And I believe that's, again, your colleagues who testified yesterday, Mr. Hurst's mark.
Yes, I can see David Hayhurst's initials on both these items.
Okay. So let's talk about your analysis. First, your analysis of the end of the dildo vibrator.
So again, the swab taken from the end of the dildo vibrator, that was a mixture of DNA from 2 individuals, and I had previously reported the results for Jeffrey Willis and MJN in that report I just testified to. I next compared the DNA profile from Rebecca Bletch to that mixture. So the 2 scenarios I compared to see which one best explains the DNA evidence was, on the top half of that fraction, was the DNA taken from the swab of end of dildo vibrator from Rebecca Bletch and one unknown, unrelated individual, or is that DNA taken from the swab of end of dildo vibrator from 2 unknown, unrelated people, neither of whom are Rebecca Bletch? And based on the DNA typing results for that item, it was 46,000 times more likely, 4,600, I apologize. 4,600 times more likely it originated from Rebecca Bletch and one unknown, unrelated person than if it originated from 2 unknown, unrelated people. And based on the statistical calculation for that comparison, this analysis provides strong support that Rebecca Bletch is a contributor to the DNA results obtained from the swab of end of dildo vibrator.
Now, did you get an opportunity to look at the data of both Ms. Bletch and Mr. Willis as it relates to this particular item? Go ahead. I'm sorry. Answer that question. I'll have another question for you.
Yes, before I perform any statistical calculation, I will look at the electronic graph of the data, which is called the electropherogram, and I look at that data to determine how many contributors are present in the mixture, and then I also look at for a visual comparison of the known sample submitted to see who may or may not be a contributor to that mixture.
And when you took a look at the pherograms, did you find any DNA types foreign to either Jeffrey Willis or Rebecca Bletch as it relates to the swab at the end of the dildo vibrator?
No, this partial mixture of DNA, I was not able to obtain a full DNA profile at all the locations that we test, but at each location where DNA was tested, there was no foreign DNA types or peak present that could not be accounted for from either Rebecca Bletch or from Jeffrey Willis.
Now, you were able to exclude some folks, too, from that. Is that correct?
That is correct. The items that were excluded as possible contributors to the swab end of the dildo vibrator were the alternate reference from Jessica Herringa, Kevin Bloom, Charlene Ann Willis, and Michelle Schnotala were all excluded as possible contributors to the DNA obtained from that item.
All right. Let's talk about your work with the Reebok gloves.
This DNA profile, the swab from the Reebok glove exterior, This was interpreted by myself as a mixture arising from two individuals. I first compared the DNA profile of Rebecca Bletch to this mixture, and then I separately compared the other DNA profiles. So there's going to be multiple statistics given for this case, or given this piece of evidence. In the first comparison, where I'm looking at Rebecca Bletch's DNA profile, the two scenarios I'm looking at to determine which better explained the DNA given the evidence that was obtained was the DNA from the swab of the Reebok glove exterior from Rebecca Bletch and one unknown unrelated individual, or was that DNA from the swab of the Reebok glove exterior better as explained as originating from two unknown unrelated people, neither of whom are Rebecca Bletch? And based on the DNA typing results for the swab of the Reebok glove exterior, it was at least 90 quadrillion times more likely that it originated from Rebecca Bletch and one unknown unrelated person than if it originated from two unknown unrelated people. And that analysis with that statistical calculation provides very strong support that Rebecca Bletch is a contributor to the DNA obtained from the swab of the Reebok glove exterior. And for clarification's sake, 90 quadrillion would be the number 90 followed by 15 zeros. I then separately compared the DNA profile from Jeffrey Willis to this item. So the two scenarios I looked at in this case were, was the DNA taken from the swab of the Reebok glove exterior? Was that DNA better as explained as originating from Jeffrey Willis and one unknown unrelated person? Or was the DNA obtained from the swab of the Reebok glove exterior better as explained as originating from two unknown unrelated people, neither of whom are Jeffrey Willis? And based on the results for this item, it was at least 47 million times more likely that the DNA originated from Jeffrey Willis and one unknown unrelated person than if it originated from two unknown unrelated people. And again, this analysis provides very strong support that Jeffrey Willis is a contributor to the DNA typing results for the swab of the Reebok glove exterior.
I will ask the same question I asked of you in for the dildo. Did you get an opportunity to review the electronic data as it relates to the work you did on the glove looking at DNA types?
Yes, I did.
And did you find any foreign DNA types other than those belonging to Jeffrey Willis and Rebecca Bletch?
No, this was a mixture again from two individuals, and although DNA wasn't detected at all locations, meaning that only a partial DNA profile was observed, all the DNA types that were observed could be accounted for by either the DNA profile of Rebecca Bletch or from Jeffrey Willis.
And you were able to reduce conclusions as well.
Yes, I was. The following people were excluded as a possible contributor to the DNA typing results from the swab of the Reebok glove exterior. That was the alternate reference sample for Jessica Herringa, MJN, the DNA profile from Kevin Bloom, the DNA profile from Charlene Ann Willis, and the DNA profile from Michelle Schnatola.
Those folks were all excluded.
They were all excluded. They were not contributors to the DNA typing results from that sample, the swab of the Reebok glove exterior.
And I'll ask you a similar question. Is the marked exhibit, People's 260, is there anything different from that marked exhibit to the original you provided to investigators?
There is not.
Your Honor, I move for the admission of People's 260.
Okay.
I have no further questions of this witness.
Good morning, Mr. Schmidt, again. You mentioned that the number involved for the vibrator in terms of Ms. Bletch is what, 4,600 to 1? That's the statistic?
Based on the DNA typing results for the swab at the end of the dildo vibrator, it was at least 4,600 times more likely that it originated from Rebecca Blech and one unknown unrelated person compared to if it originated from two unknown unrelated people.
And the number is 90 quadrillion for Blech in terms of the Reebok gloves?
Based on the DNA results for the swab of the Reebok glove exterior, it was at least 90 quadrillion times more likely that it originated from Rebecca Blech and one unknown unrelated person compared to if it originated from two unknown unrelated people.
And you mentioned that quadrillion is 90 followed by 15 zeros?
That's correct.
How many zeros follow the 46 and 4600?
4,600 would be 4,600.
2 zeros.
Correct.
Thank you. One of the places you didn't find DNA, you didn't find Mrs. Blech's DNA, were on the headphones that you evaluated? On the headphones that you evaluated?
I'm now referencing report GR 143508, record number 19, and this is where I did the DNA from the swab of the headphones. And yes, I was able to exclude the DNA profile from Rebecca Blech to the major donor. However, the minor donor to that mixture from at least two individuals was insufficient for comparison purposes.
Would you do me a favor? Answer the question I asked you. If I want to know about the minors, I'll ask you about that, okay? Thank you. The headphones, are these earbuds, the headphones that go into a person's ear?
I'm now looking at my notes that I took when I examined the headphones, and these were taken as I examined them, and this was done on December 14th of 2015. I described the pair of white headphones as one pair of white headphones submitted in the same bag as another item.
Okay. Are we talking about headphones similar to the iPhone headphones, the Apple headphones, that sort of thing? Any differences that you can tell us about?
I don't know if the brand of white headphones was from Apple or not.
Does any portion of the headphones go into the ear? Do you recall that? Or do they hang around, clip to the ear, and they're both on the outside?
Yes, one of the portions did go into the ear.
Okay. And you also evaluated the carry bag, the pouch that the headphones were in. Is that correct? The phone bag? I don't know the terminology.
I'm not sure. No, I did not. In this record, inside the bag with the headphones were the pair of the black Harley-Davidson sunglasses that had previously been examined and tested. I can see right here that I used one swab to swab the section of the headphone cord between the bifurcation before the earbud split and the end plug. So only the cord section of the headphones was swabbed, and that was approximately 31 inches.
Why wasn't the portion, why wasn't the portion that actually went into the person's ears swabbed for DNA?
It was not done at that time. We were looking to see if perhaps there was any foreign DNA that may have been from grabbing the headphones.
Okay. So the portions that would have gone into Ms. Blech's ear, those weren't swabbed at all, as far as you know?
Correct. It was only the cord section that was swabbed.
And I think you testified that you didn't swab her telephone?
I personally did not swab her telephone. One of my colleagues may have swabbed it.
Did you evaluate her telephone for DNA?
I personally did not evaluate the telephone sample for DNA.
Well, let's go back to the headphones then. All right. Person played. There's been testimony that Ms. Blech was on the phone close to the point. Well, it's one of the points where the murder occurred. Okay, there's testimony to that. But you didn't find her DNA on as a major contributor on the headphones, the plugs that went into her ears, or the cord attached to those, or or the sunglasses, correct?
The portion of the headphones that went in the ear was not tested for DNA, so I can't make any comparisons of Rebecca Bletch's DNA profile to a sample that wasn't taken. The major donor to the cord section of the headphones was not Rebecca Bletch. She was excluded as being the major donor to that sample. I did not process the phone sample, and by the time I started making DNA comparisons, that sample, due to updated laboratory procedures, was not eligible for comparison purposes.
And the sunglasses, you didn't do those either?
I do not believe so.
Well, for the sake of my next question, let's assume that Ms. Bletch's DNA was not found as a major contributor to the sunglasses, and Mr. Wilson, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think she's a major contributor to any of that pile of stuff that we found of hers by the road. And my question is this: given the nature of the events that led to that pile being there, I'm assuming that at some point between the time she left the house and the time she got there, she must have touched that stuff, at least to load it on her person. But we're not finding DNA on that stuff. So my question to you is, why not? Why aren't we finding DNA when it would have been so recent to her having touched it? Under my example, anyway, it would have been so recent to having her touched it. Why would we find DNA on it of hers that you can locate?
Before I answer this question, do you have the report showing the DNA that was detected on those items? I do not have those. Those are not reports that I authored. If you could please.
I don't have them handy. I'm just asking you to evaluate based on my hypothetical. Hypothetically speaking, based on your experience and training, given the proximity, the close proximity of when Mrs. Bletch would have touched these objects, and the time that they were recovered and swabbed, can you explain why her DNA wouldn't? What is there in the nature of DNA why we wouldn't expect to find? We didn't find her DNA on that stuff, the sunglasses, the cord, the pouch, the stuff she would have had on her just before she was killed.
Not speaking to any specific results except for the results in which I perform the DNA testing and have the results in reports that I can review in front of me. It's possible that you would not find DNA from items if there wasn't prolonged contact with those items, or perhaps there was contact in which gloves were being worn, so there wasn't direct contact with that item. Many times we aren't able to detect DNA because there's just not a sufficient amount of DNA present on the item. That doesn't mean there's not DNA, it's just below our detection thresholds. And also there's always the possibility of environmental factors that may cause the DNA is not able to be detected, such as extreme sunlight, rain, or snow, or possibly DNA may not be detected on an item if it's been cleaned with some sort of disinfectant like bleach.
And it also depends, and this is so obvious, it has to be where you searched for it. In other words, DNA doesn't glow in the dark. You have to actually swab for it, and if it's not in the location you're swabbing, you're not going to find DNA where you don't search for it. Isn't that kind of self-explanatory? Do you agree with that?
Certainly, I can speak of no results of samples that were not taken.
Yeah.
However, in the case of the headphones, I did swab a 31-inch section of the cord. I did not swab the actual earbuds that would go into, presumably, Miss Bletch's ears. I'm not sure what the probative value of someone wearing headphones and having their DNA on their own headphones wearing them would be. However, it was not done in this case.
But you did swab the Reebok gloves.
My colleague, Dave Hayhurst, did swab the Reebok gloves.
Which portion of the Reebok's glove did Mr. Hayhurst swab, if you're aware?
As the samples listed, it was the exterior of the glove.
The entire exterior or just portions of the exterior?
Judge, I guess I'm going to object. Mr. Hayhurst testified yesterday before the swab. So Mr. Johnson certainly had the opportunity, if he didn't, to ask him yesterday. This Schmidt did not swab the gloves.
What is the objection, Your Honor? What's the basis?
Relevance.
Relevance, okay. It's relevant because this witness has testified as to where she found the DNA. And therefore, I'm allowed to ask her what areas were searched so she could find it. So
If she knows.
if you know, or if you have a report that tells you.
I do not have a copy of the report that David Hayhurst authored regarding where he swabbed the Reebok gloves.
But
Go-
you know it's not, the interior was not swabbed.
The sample name is called swab of Reebok glove exterior. So one can make the conclusion that the exterior portion of the Reebok glove was swabbed.
Does it say interior?
It says exterior, EXTERIOR.
So we can also make the conclusion that the interior was not swabbed.
Judge,
Based on the same logic.
Check that it's been asked and answered.
Do you know, other than what's on the report?
Your Honor, is that a question for me? Sorry, it's hard to see you.
Yes. Do you know, other than what is on the report?
On the report that I authored, I only performed statistical calculations on electronic data. I do not have the report authored by David Hayhurst on how he performed serology testing, looking for either the possible presence of biological fluids like blood, semen, or saliva, or swabbing an item for skin cells. I looked at and made comparisons to the swab taken from the swab of Reebok glove exterior.
Thank you. When you were able to exclude individuals from the sample, that is from the sample, correct? In other words, if an area of the glove wasn't evaluated, wasn't checked, wasn't swabbed, you can't exclude that DNA might be in those areas, but you can exclude it from the sample of the areas where it was actually sampled, correct?
Yes, the sample I speak of is the area in which a cotton tip swab was moistened with sterile water and swabbed over the exterior of that Reebok glove. I can't speak to any results that may have not been taken because an area was not swabbed on the glove.
So that was a yes. You can't exclude it from the areas that weren't swabbed.
I cannot exclude any pieces of evidence that weren't swabbed and tested and performed DNA analysis on.
Thank you. You mentioned, and I'm not sure that on direct examination, Mr. Hilson asked you if it was necessary for there to be an ejaculation before there's the presence of sperm, and I'm not sure that's within your area of expertise, is it?
Yes, I'm trained to identify the biological fluid of semen and to identify sperm cells. And in my basic training, we need to know where seminal fluid and sperm cells originate from. And that in that training, I'm trained to know that sperm cells and seminal fluid are from ejaculate of a male individual.
Okay. Is ejaculate and orgasm the same thing?
Your Honor, I can't answer that.
Okay. So you don't know whether or not there's ejaculate of sperm cells and seminal fluid prior to an orgasm? You can't answer that.
I can't answer that.
Thank you. Oh, you mentioned that on one occasion you didn't process a set of hair, and because it wasn't human hair. Do you remember that testimony?
Yes, we received 2 possible hairs or fibers, and I did look at those underneath a microscope, and I determined through my training and experience that those possible hairs were not of human origin, and we don't do any DNA testing on pieces of evidence not from human of origin. So if they were possibly from an animal, I do not do DNA testing on animal hairs.
Okay. So were you able to conclude that they were in fact hair? You said hair and fiber. So were you able to come to the conclusion that these were hair of some sort of living thing?
I concluded that they were non-human hairs.
Okay. So they weren't fibers. They weren't like a leather glove or anything along those lines.
The possible hair fiber was not a leather glove.
Okay.
It looked like a possible hair fiber.
Okay, that's, clear that up for me. You mentioned, you were talking about the peaks when Mr. Hilson spoke to you, of that even though you got partial DNA, there were no peaks that couldn't be explained by the two people involved in the testing. And I'm just wondering, it has been my understanding that human beings are very similar in our DNA. Is that right? Incorrect? Like 99% the same? Is that incorrect?
I'm not sure I understand the question. We're able to individualize different people using DNA, and looking at the areas that we test, we're able to see a unique DNA profile from individuals unless they happen to be identical twins.
Okay. So, the question you answered was that you had I think it was, and correct me if I'm wrong, you had a partial. And one of the questions were any of the DNA, in this case Ms. Bletch and Mr. Willis, in the partial, were there any peaks that couldn't be substantiated by comparing one of their two DNA? In other words, they covered the gamut between the two of them. And so my question is that unusual? Was that an unusual thing to find, or are we mostly the same anyway with two people? You probably find the... Go ahead.
Each DNA profile that I was making comparisons to for all the evidence was unique. Although there was some family members, like from the Bletch family, each DNA profile was a unique DNA profile. I believe my colleagues have testified before that you get half your DNA from your mom and half your DNA from your dad. No one in this case was an identical twin, so each DNA profile was unique. And I made the additional comparisons of the other individuals that were excluded from these DNA profiles, but looking at the graph of the data, there was no DNA types or peaks that couldn't be explained from the DNA profiles from Rebecca Bletch and from Jeffrey Willis.
Did that result surprise you, or is that something you'd expect when you have two individuals and the variance between human beings?
Judge, I'm going to object this to, I don't even understand the question.
Well,
I don't even know if Ms. Schmidt can answer that question, because I'm not even sure what it's asking.
Do you understand the question, ma'am?
No, I can repeat that each person has a unique DNA profile.
If you don't understand the question, then you can't possibly answer it. So you'll have to rephrase the
Thank
question
you.
so you understand it.
and should I ask any other questions you don't have, please let me know. I can rephrase it. Okay. You've got these partial DNA strands, correct? And you can't make an identification from them, but if you take Mr. Willis's DNA and you take Ms. Bletch's DNA, between the two of them, you can find all the peaks and valleys or whatever it is you're looking for between the two of them in those partials that you have, correct?
Looking at the DNA profiles, we're looking at peaks that look like mountain peak-likes on the electronic graph of the data called the electropharogram. There are no valleys. And looking at that data, I looked at it, but then I also performed statistical evaluations using computer software to determine the likelihood ratios if Jeffrey Willis was a contributor to that mixture and one unknown, unrelated person, compared to was that DNA that originated from those items from two unknown, unrelated people. I did the same thing separately with Rebecca Bletch. So although I looked at the graph of the data visually, I performed a statistical calculation, which I've testified to today.
I see the problem. We don't understand each other. I'm asking you a entirely different question. Let me try asking it in another way. Maybe you'll understand it. You had DNA strand, partial. You took two people, and between those two people, their DNA, you can account for all the peaks you found in those DNA strands. And I'm wondering, is that unusual, or is that likely to happen when you have any two people that you took both their DNA and you looked at a strand that you're going to likely find corresponding peaks in that partial sampling? Did you understand the question that time?
I'm not, and I think it's based on some of the terminology you're using. I'm not understanding the question, sir.
Let me answer this simply. You found that Mr. Willis's and Ms. Bletch's DNA had peaks that correspond to the partial that you had. Is that unusual, or is that something you'd expect when you'd have two people, and given the basic variance we have between our DNAs?
The areas that we're looking at, and we had full DNA profiles for the comparison of Rebecca Bletch and the comparison of Jeffrey Willis. So we compared that to a partial mixture of DNA, and the DNA from those types was present in the partial mixture that I was able to detect and make comparisons to. I don't have any expectation upon looking at DNA mixtures who may not be included as a possible contributor to those mixtures. I perform statistical calculations and then am also able to make exclusions to those individuals whose DNA types are not present in mixtures or in partial mixtures of DNA detected.
Was your results unusual?
I don't have any unusual expectations, so I don't know how to answer. I have no expectations when I make comparisons, so I don't know how to answer the question unusual.
Okay. And I think we're beating a dead horse here. I don't think we're going to ever communicate on this particular question, so I'll move on to another one.
Okay.
The 4D1X, do you know where that sample came from?
4D1X was the DNA profile taken from Rebecca Bletch, and that was processed by myself.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, I could give more information if you would like, sir.
No, that covers it for me. Thank you. Is there? You mentioned the STAR systems that you're using. The STAR mix, is it called?
The computer software package to perform statistical calculations and assist DNA interpretation is a software program called StarMix, STRMIX.
Are there any subjective portions to it?
Before I can perform any analysis in StarMix, the subjective portion is that I, as a trained DNA analyst with my 11 years of experience, need to determine how many contributors there are to the mixture. I then determine the number of contributors to the mixture, put in that information into the computer software, and then add in all the information detected from the DNA profile, and it will then help and assist in interpretation and performing statistical calculations.
So that's yes?
Yes.
Do you recall what was resubmitted in record number 18? What was resubmitted in your testing for record number 18? I think it's 18 and 19, StarMix?
Sir, could you give me a laboratory? There's a number of different laboratory numbers associated with that. Could you give me a laboratory number for that? Thank you. Just a moment, please. GR16 2492 record 18 was not processed by me, and I don't have a copy of that report at this time. I did write GR16 2492 record 19, and I do have a copy of that report at this time. Could you please re-ask your question, sir?
You mentioned that the one report wasn't authored by you, but 19 was?
18 was not authored by me. 19 was authored by me.
What was resubmitted in that test? There was a resubmission in that. What was resubmitted?
There wasn't a resubmission done in this case. We did look at evidence that had previously been analyzed, and all those were looked at. I only looked at the electronic data for those samples. So that electronic data is housed within our system that captures the reports with all the associated paperwork. So no actual items were brought back into the laboratory, but I did look at samples that were previously analyzed in other reports, that data, to compile the report that I did the StarMix analysis on.
Do you know, you did the analysis on the Reebok glove. Do you know the nature of the fluid, of the, maybe it wasn't, I'll assume it was the fluid that was transferred onto the glove that you found the DNA in? In other words, was this semen, was this blood, was this saliva? Do you know the nature of the fluid that from which the DNA originated?
I did not do that original testing. I believe David Hayhurst did that testing. In this case, we were just testing DNA. I do not know of any fluid that may have transferred the DNA or what type of fluid that may have been that transferred DNA.
It may not have even been a fluid at all. It might have been skin cells or something along those lines. Is that correct?
It would have been an item that contained DNA, so it could have been a fluid or skin cells. Correct, sir?
One moment, please. Bit of clarification, if I may. The 4D1X, and I cut you off. You're going to probably give me the information I'm going to ask you from now. What was the source of that particular sample? The 4D1X on the first.
I created a blood stain card, and we received a blood tube, a purple top tube containing blood from Rebecca Bletch that I believe was taken at autopsy.
Okay. And did you process that, or did you just, I guess, well, I don't even know the process. Did you handle that particular sample from beginning to end, or did someone else work on that particular sample in between the work you would have done on it, if you did any work on it?
I created the blood stain card and created a cutting and placed it in a tube for further DNA analysis. I did not perform the original DNA analysis on Rebecca Bletch's DNA profile.
Thank you. May I approach you on? Sure. Ms. Schmidt, would you take a look at what's looks like record number 27 there? Did you do the DNA work on that particular circumstance, or was that something done by someone else?
I did perform the DNA work, and that was the second time we performed DNA analysis on the DNA sample from Rebecca Bletch. When it was originally submitted into the laboratory, we were using one amplification kit, called the PowerPlex 16 Hot Start system. I then performed DNA testing on that same cutting and that same extract to look at it in the fusion amplification system. And the fusion amplification system is just looking at more DNA locations than the 16 system provided.
Thank you, Ms. Schmidt. I have no further questions.
Just one point of clarification. Ms. Schmidt, the last three lab reports we went through, the battery cover, the I guess better way to classify it, the star mix reports that you did in this investigation. You didn't pull the items and read swab and do all that, did you?
No, I did not. I looked at electronic data that was generated by my colleagues.
So essentially, the beauty of what you were able to do is you didn't have to mess around with any of the physical stuff. That work had already been done. You were just looking at the electronic data and using that star mix system to help make these interpretations.
That is correct.
And essentially, you're trained in the other stuff, the serology and performing the test, but you're also trained in interpreting and performing the star mix as well.
That is correct.
Okay. I have nothing else to say.
I have no further questions, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ma'am, you may stand down.
Judge, just want to make sure the court has received exhibits 1 through 260, excluding number 23.
That's what I show.
With that, Your Honor, the people rest.
Okay. Mr. Master, you may proceed.
Your Honor, what we're going to do next, we'll probably do outside the hearing of the jury.
Okay.
And, Your Honor, as it may take some time.
Okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask that you return this afternoon at 2 p.m. We'll be taking up some matters unrelated to your role in the process in the meantime. So don't discuss the case with anyone. Don't have any discussions with anyone involved in the case. Don't acquaint yourself with any media accounts of this event. We'll see you back here at 2 p.m. Thank you.